Mary Jane, the power of story. Have you, since maybe you were a child, but in more recent years, ever picked up a book and read it and realized it had changed your life? And one of the reasons I ask this is that Reed Tracy of Hay House said he often stands back at big events where there are authors well-known and not so well-known. And he said no matter who they are, people walk up to them. He just stands back and listens, and they say these words: your book changed my life. Yeah. And it's they're the most beautiful words that I think a new author might hear when she first publishes her book. But I don't think no matter how many books you've published, you ever get tired of realizing that your book, the book you wrote from inside you, from your heart, can change someone's life. Hello and welcome to the Write the Book Inside You podcast. Tips, tools and interviews for coaches and healers like you who want to write a nonfiction book to boost your visibility, clients and cash flow while making a difference. I'm your host, Carol Westmore, a multi-published author and energy psychology tapping book coach. Now let's jump into today's episode.
You know, the power of storytelling, it's kind of an ancient art, isn't it? You know, we think about parables in the Bible, and just that art of telling stories to teach lessons is really old. But yes, so for me, I know you're going to talk anyway, aren't you, about Brandon Bay's The Journey?
Yeah, we'll get on to that. Let's talk about.
So that was certainly one, and also this was one of the first books that I was kind of put onto. Many people will know Louise Hay, You Can Heal Your Life. For me, the really powerful bit of this book is at the back, which is her story. And I've recommended this book to maybe hundreds of people over the years. And I always say, read her story first. Go to the back and read her story. Because for me, there is so much power in that tale of her own cancer, discovering that she had it and healing it. And for me, that's the power of the book. And the content's great too, but I love the story part in there.
Yeah, and I think if you know actually the story of how she had set out with this pamphlet and began to help men with AIDS, particularly at it, and she went and held these open groups with people with AIDS, and eventually Oprah heard about her and obviously her own story, and that was when her book really took off. But when I was presenting recently on the book Inside You, I always mention the fact that will a book make me rich? Well, not necessarily in that sense, but it will enrich your life, and of course then you have the spin-offs of your coaching and the speaking, etc. Louise Hay was an example I used. She didn't set out to get rich, although later her book has now sold 56 million copies. That's something about the power of story. And the two books that I'm going to share are also based on a very deep longing by the authors. For me, as you know, I worked with Brandon Bayes in the early 2000s, but it's really an example of when you are talking to your clients, and in a book you're talking to potential clients, they're the sort of stories that really connect and communicate with your customers, and ultimately what's in it for me. Why should I care? You don't want to be in your book trying to sell something. By telling your story or that of your clients, you really make a connection. And when I picked up Brandon's book, The Journey, obviously before I met her and invited her to South Africa, it was the story of forgiveness and of healing from a football-sized tumor by realizing that she had within her the tools to change the cellular memory, which was at the root of it. And it did involve forgiveness. So when people heard that story all those years ago, they flocked to the workshops in South Africa because it was the new South Africa, and people were hungry to learn how to move on from the dark days. As Amanda Gorman said at the inauguration of Joe Biden, to step from the dark, the shadows, into the light. And we are all in the process of that, whether we're going through our own dark period of grief or things that are happening in our lives, or whether we actually are in a time where it seems dark, we must look for the light. And I think Brandon's story really, her own ability to go on stage and tell that story and to connect with people was really, has made that book an ongoing bestseller because the journey work continues.
A book that changed my life too. So I was, a friend of mine who is obviously more astute than me, gave me a copy in 2000. And I shoved it on my bookshelf, never gave it another thought. And then in 2001, I was diagnosed with cancer and I had surgery. And when I was in hospital, I thought, I'm going to read that book when I come out. I still had no idea what it was about. I took it off the shelf and I sat down and read it in a day. I was off work, recuperating, so I didn't have too much else to do. This is 2001, so the internet's still fairly new, but I got online and I looked for a journey practitioner. And I found someone quite near me, and I rang her up and made an appointment and went to see her and had a 3-hour journey therapy. And it changed my life without a shadow of a doubt. It was probably the biggest factor in healing my cancer, because when I went and had more surgery, they had said that the cancer was right up into the margins. Then when I went back, they said, oh, seems to have gone. We probably got it all first time, they said. But I felt different. It was just transformative.
And Mary Jane, do you now bring in some of the techniques that we learnt in the journey about feeling our feelings? And, is there anything, although you didn't train as a journey therapist, I did, but, both of us are EFT and matrix reimprinting practitioners, and we bring in a lot of other work. I'm very intuitive when I work with someone. How did that book change how you are proactive in your therapy?
Well, at that time, I was working in banking, so I wasn't even a therapist. But a year later, I began my training as a homeopath. And for sure, it's certainly, I bring techniques from it certainly into the EFT world, to my EFT work, because there's a lot of NLP, isn't there, in the journey work? And I think there's a big overlap with EFT, and I think it's just super powerful.
Well, people might ask me, why did I, after 3 years and being, a top journey therapist in South Africa, why did I then open up to EFT tapping as a modality? And the reason was that Brandon didn't want to appoint anyone to teach her work. No matter how great you were or how devoted you were, she wanted to be, and maybe some of her close family members, the only teacher of the journey. And I was a promoter of the EFT and other people who came to South Africa. And I thought to myself, it'll never be as profound. It's just tapping. I can't see how it can go into the deep depths of your soul. But the person, Anne Ross at the time, who came out first, and then later Carl, I had sessions, and then I had a client come to me who didn't have time for a journey. And this is how I believe we are guided. And he said, I've got OCCD. I'm 2 hours late because I brushed my teeth for hours and I died under anesthetic. And the whole story of his name is the case studies in my book, You Can Break Free Fast. But in 1 hour, we went back to the root cause of why he wasn't healing. He died under anesthetic. He'd got to a certain point for over 2 years of his health, but he wasn't back on his feet. And when I tapped, I said, look, can I try this tapping? Because I used to take 3 hours for a journey. He said, sure. And he didn't know, and I didn't really know, because I was new to tapping. But when I knew from the journey to go back and to look for the triggering, the root memories, the traumas that set this up, I call it.
Yeah.
And he had been knocked off his feet repeatedly in his life as an adult, but also when he was 2 years old. His brother had come, punched him in the stomach as he was learning to walk. And after that process, his life completely changed. He just wasn't the same person. He healed. He said, Carol, I've done 7 years of tax. I've gone back to work. It was like Grace showed me, provided you have the right, you go into a process and you're intuitive. And I still use the forgiveness campfire from the journey, and I love the journey. And I was shown that I had to move on, because I then became a teacher of EFT and then later matrix reimprinting. Yeah. So that's the first thing about the journey. It's still a very, very, I'm still very grateful for Brandon for coming into my life, because it healed a lot of my original traumas growing up in an alcoholic home. And talk therapy had frustrated me because I knew I wasn't getting there. But at that point, I didn't know an alternative until the journey, which helps you go down through the layers and feel your feelings, which brings me to Kevin, her husband's book, Light in the Heart of Darkness. Now, when I was working with them, we didn't talk a lot about Kevin's journey, but what we found, what he's come out with now in his book about depression, was that the journey, by going into his own unconscious memories, he realized, although they told him he was clinically depressed, it was a chemical dependence, chemical depression. What he found was when he went back to a memory, which he shares in the book, of he loved his sister, and I know Deb's his sister, and she was younger than him, and he was about 8 and she was about 10 months. And his mother said, take Debs to the park in the buggy. And so as they went down the hill, he was playing peekaboo with her, but by mistake, the pram slipped out of his hand, and he saw it go down the hill and overturn, and he thought he had killed his sister. Oh, I'm just getting goosebumps. And when he tells it, if you hear Kevin tell the story, I'd love to have him on my podcast to share again how only when he had his first journey therapy and he went back to that memory did he realize that his little 7-8-year-old self had shut down and become, I must never be happy-go-lucky again. I must be very careful I don't kill someone, and it's a secret. I mustn't tell my mother what I did. That released the depression. And what he says for sadness, anxiety, you need to go back and see what traumas could be at the root of it.
And we know that from EFT, it's all about finding the events. We can work on what's going on currently, but it's the real power is finding the events where the beliefs were formed, really, isn't it? Yes. It's where the beliefs were formed.
Yeah, and we call it the echoes. So now you and I have been, running a program that teaches EFT, and it could be journey therapists, anyone who has a experience and who's got, knows how to present how they do their work, and has a book inside them, a book from the heart that they want to share with the world. Yeah. Because compared with 10 years or 15 years ago, there's never been a better time to publish your own book. And it's not difficult, but there are some steps, some key book hook tips, which can make your first draft so much more rich and can save you years of putting it back in a drawer and saying, I can't write a book. What do you think, Mary Jane? Because you've been helping clear some of the inner blocks for our clients who feel that they have a book, but they've got issues blocking them, beliefs.
Yeah, so really common things, we've had people on our courses who maybe were dyslexic. And so the thought of writing a book is kind of, and they've maybe thought they'd overcome that, but things keep recurring. So, I put together a tapping sequence for those people. Lot of people who just think, who am I to be writing this book? Who am I to be sharing? And what do I know? I don't know anything compared to all these other people. That's a really common one as well, isn't it? What I really love is because you've written a number of books, and so you've come up with a really clear structure, because I think for most people, they think, I could write a book, but I wouldn't know where to start. And so what you do is you give them that almost a step-by-step guide, isn't it? To start, literally start at the beginning, just write it, not even start at the beginning of the book, but start with an idea.
Outline.
Let's get clear on that, let's
and
think
it
about
is ongoing, isn't it? It's not just, it's not like you clear your blocks to writing a book and off you go, because you'll come across something like, should I tell the story about my father, or is it too revealing too much? What's my family going to say? So things come up along the way. I just say, write it down. You need to write from your heart. You need to get it in a journal. That doesn't mean you're going to publish every word about the people who've been in your life, but it does mean you need the raw material. And we always talk about throwing shoveling the sand from the beach into a sandpit, so that at the end you can build your sandcastle, which is your book.
What I've discovered from working with you and running these courses is that process of writing your book the end result isn't necessarily just a book, or it's not even it is a therapeutic journey. Going through that process the way we work with people, it's actually really therapeutic, and people have had amazing realizations and made connections because writing a book has just held up the mirror to other parts of their life as well. Really healing for everyone who's done it, hasn't
it's healing. And even if they've got their first draft, or they've decided they're going to write a different book once they've finished the
course,
which
has happened a couple of times.
Yeah, that does happen. And other people say, well, I don't want to self-publish, I want to find Hay House. And so, there are many options, but until you've got that first draft down, and until you realize the structure of a good self-help or transformational book, and it can be a memoir, and it can be a teaching memoir that specifically has your signature system, or your story might be a 5-step process with your story and your clients' case studies that you've woven through the book, that helps people by the end of the book say, your book changed my life. Today's podcast episode is sponsored by my book, You Can Break Free Fast EFT Tapping, the second edition, which comes with Power Boost, the Law of Attraction with matrix reimprinting using EFT tapping. Available on Amazon and other places where you can buy books. And so I do still wear that kind of hat when I'm talking to someone in the program. What is it that's unique, but what's going to change someone's life? But you need that hook. And that's where I've got the 5 book hook tips, which I give away on our site, writethebookinside.com/free gift. Thanks for joining me on today's podcast. Want a free gift to inspire you further on your book writing adventure? My free checklist, 5 book hook tips to kickstart your book writing journey, will help you get clarity on the key essentials to make your book a winner. Download it at writethebookinside.com/free gift. The links are in the show notes. Until next time, a big virtual hug and keep writing.